Welcome to Slick Talk. I am your host, Blackstone Joe, and you are listening to episode 37, an episode that might feature various automobiles. No, I'm not going to be literally talking about various cars, but these cars will be talking to us through my window. It sounds like there's just one combustion issue after another going down Lake Avenue. So let's just say there's various vehicles out there that probably are in need of used oil analysis. But we're going to dive right in. We're going to keep moving forward. And that's something you need to do in pretty much all walks of life, especially when you're new to something, when you're doubting yourself, when you're maybe dealing with that nasty business called imposter syndrome. I'm not going to get too psychological on you here, but according to Google, imposter syndrome is loosely defined as doubting your abilities and feeling like a fraud. Now, your trusted host here is no fraud. I think you've learned that by now after 37 episodes of hearing me talk about used oil analysis. But nevertheless, when I first started the podcast, I had no idea what a good mic was, how to edit audio. So quite literally, I sort of was fishing in the dark for a while, and you can feel that imposter syndrome creep in. And I think the first time I noticed it was when I went to college, because I was a first generation college student. I went to Indiana University, and walking around campus, it's hard to wonder if you belong. When you're in the classroom, when you're, working towards your degree, it's hard to at all times feel like you belong there, especially when no one else in your family has been there. Not just Indiana University, but any college campus. But what matters is that you are present and you are speaking to what you know, and you are relying on your experiences to keep moving forward. I think the way you avoid imposter syndrome is just speaking to what you know at all times and never once pretending that you're something you're not. So that's just my little piece of advice to anyone who is either in a new profession, trying to master a new skill, whatever it may be, a hobby even. But going even beyond college, this feeling of imposter syndrome came up very recently because we have a new episode in the works, a pretty big one, with a collaborator that I'm excited to name, but I need to get a few more ducks in a row, or to be more honest, I want to record the audio. I want to get the file in my possession. I want to have some grasp of the real thing before I allow myself to get too excited. So this collaborator is a big one, and to the point where, even myself, who's been working at this, who's been exploring oil analysis for several years now, talking about it now on a podcast for over a year, even I was still taken aback a little bit when this collaboration came up, and I was like, me? You want to talk to me about oil? I was like, you have that little bit of self-doubt come in, because even with several years in the game, you wonder when you've earned big things, or when you're deserving of certain accolades or respect even. It's easy to wonder at times. So all I had to do was remind myself of what I've done to this point, and that is putting years in the bank of building customer relationships, honing my craft as far as learning something new every day about what we can discover in used oil and how to communicate our findings in a clear, easy to understand manner. And as soon as I kind of took a step back and took stock of everything in my time with Blackstone, I was like, well, absolutely, I've earned this collaboration, So I'm looking forward to announcing it, giving you some more details. But rest assured, it's an episode that I'm excited about, and I think a lot of you will be too. Today we have another Catchpan segment, and this one features a question we got in on the Twitter from our friend Carl. Carl asked about the myths and truths when it comes to the color of used oil and what it can tell us. And I'm happy to address this because when I'm looking at a lot of oil slips that come in with samples on a daily basis, it's pretty common for people to note the color and they'll be concerned or assuming there's a problem based on a certain visual characteristic. So this is something that comes up often enough that absolutely is a topic I'm happy to return to on the podcast. So here's a piece of advice right off the top, something clear, direct. Don't rely on color alone. Unless your oil looks like something that you could have ordered off Steak and Shake's menu. Mainly speaking to a milkshake. If oil looks like a chocolate milkshake or has that weird foamy appearance where it's kind of obvious there's liquid, yeah, alright, you probably have a coolant leak. But milkshake appearance aside, usually the color won't tell you much. I think a while ago I talked about a story involving a car dealership and someone was selling a Blackstone employee a car. They pop the hood, they take the dipstick out and they say, "Yep, that is synthetic oil. Full synthetic." And God bless the Blackstone employee, they did not give this person a hard time and say, "How do you know that's synthetic based on the color?" Because that person didn't know. They were just full of salesmanship, let's put it that way. You can't determine whether oil is synthetic or not just based on the appearance, and if you think you can, well, then you're blessed with some sort of X-Men superhero power that I haven't discovered yet in any of the films or any of the comic books. Now, I will say that color can be related to a problem. So don't take it as me saying that a visual appearance is never relevant. It's just that you don't want to rely on color alone. Take diesel engine oil, for example. Often, it's pretty sooty. You'll see a very dark appearance, and that doesn't mean anything is wrong. Far from it. I mean, usually it just means the oil is doing its job. But yes, there can be, a very dark appearance brought on by an issue with combustion, excess heat. Yes, you can see a problem in used oil analysis that also involves the oil having a very, very dark appearance. But you would be mistaken if you took a dark appearance by itself and said, "Oh, well, see, I have a problem." Feel free to note the color on the slip. That's certainly fair to do. You just don't want that to be your only guide when you're trying to see how the engine is doing and whether or not it has a problem. You want to go to the spectral analysis. You want to see what elements are present. Is there contamination? Are there signs of poor wear, etc.? Because then you have a lot more ground to stand on. But I would say more often than not, when people bring up the color of used oil with concern, generally it's not the problem people think it is. Recently, I was looking at a report and the customer wrote on the slip, "Hey, why is this oil so red?" And I wanted to meet them halfway, so I went ahead, I walked over to the lab and I was looking at the oil myself, and it might have had a bit more of an amber appearance than others. I really didn't think it had a red hue per se. Like, when I think of red, I think of like ATF fluid and how that can be like very, very obviously red. I wouldn't say this had a particular appearance about it, but I was willing to check it out, and we always are. So, if you note a concern like that, we will take it seriously, take a look at ourselves and see where things are at. But rest assured, if you're looking at a sample, say you see a color that you're just not familiar with, if that color is not accompanied by contamination, poor wear, some issue with the viscosity, some unusual additive elements, etc., etc., don't let that bother you. It's something that can only be related, but usually not sole evidence of the issue that you have. And yes, there are situations, I won't, pretend that there aren't. There are situations where the color had characteristics, worrisome characteristics, that were accompanied by other things that didn't look right. But I don't think, unless you have that milkshake color that indicates a severe coolant leak, I don't think anyone should take the color alone and assume things about the oil's lubricating abilities, ability to clean the engine, or that their engine has a problem because, it looks a little darker than usual, or maybe it's, darker than, say you have two vehicles, you ran the same oil in both vehicles, and one looks a little darker than the other. I wouldn't lose sleep over that, especially if the oil is not showing signs of excess heat, there's no contamination, anything like that. Let the standard analysis be your guide, and if you want to go a step further, you can see how much active additive is left by adding on the TBN. TBN stands for total base number. It measures active additives. Those are important for combating acids, keeping those from building up in the crankcase. If you have an oil that's holding a strong TBN, has a good viscosity, no contamination, healthy wear levels, there's no scenario where I would let the color, even if it's maybe a little darker than what I'm accustomed to, or darker than the color I'm getting out of another vehicle running the same oil, I would sleep soundly with a clean, standard analysis. And heck, why not add on the TBN if you want a little more ground to stand on? So that brings today's episode to a close. Again, we have a big episode in the works. This might be episode 38, it might be 39, just kind of depends on release schedule and how we end up doing the recording process with this collaborator we've got coming on. It's a process I'm in the thick of right now, so we're figuring it out. So I don't want to give out a date just yet. That will be on our social media. On our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you will get the news there. So stay tuned. If you aren't following us, I would highly suggest finding us on all of those platforms. And as always, if you like what you're hearing, please don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, all the things that you can do on the good old, sometimes bad, always exciting social media. This is Blackstone Joe, signing off.